So I'm going to show you my workflow, which is kind of monstrous and rather large, but you'll see it's not that complicated. The idea is that it supports inpainting and outpainting. And you can also use two models. For example, you can use the Flux fill, which doesn't use control net. It is good for inpainting and indeed effective for outpainting. And the effect is so natural that you don't even notice the edges of the image. Meanwhile, the standard workflow Flux Dev is used with the Alimama model. It uses Alimama's control net, which is one of the best we have for Flux. In fact, I think that Alimama sometimes works better than Flux Fill, but it depends. Sometimes Alimama often performs better when you are replacing an object. I feel that it brings more color and responds better to the prompt. Although results may vary, it is necessary to test to find the best setting. Alimama's strong point is when you want to replace the entire scene. For example, if you want to keep just the face of the character and swap out the background, but Flux Fill is not very suitable for that. Conversely, Alimama doesn't work well for outpainting, while Flux Fill performs very well for outpainting. Therefore, you need to choose the correct option. In the Workflow Options section, you choose between models 1, 2, or 3, determining which model to load. However, there's a problem. I don't know if it's only on my computer or if it's due to a lack of virtual memory or RAM. I have already increased the virtual memory because the ComfyUI was crashing frequently. I increased the HD's virtual memory and the performance improved. But even so, this workflow freezes when I switch between Flux Dev and the regular Flux. It always freezes, and ComfyUI crashes too. I haven't tried increasing the virtual memory by much, but maybe it's necessary. It might require around 40 GB or so, I don't know. Even then, the system continues crashing. Whenever I switch models, whether using Alimama or Flux Fill, I often have to restart the ComfyUI to freely switch. Unfortunately, this becomes necessary. Now let's load the models. It's important to load them because the path to your folder varies according to your configuration. Therefore, when loading a new workflow, you must correctly set the path for your models. I won't explain how to download the models because it's simple, just search for them. Download the regular Flux Dev model, and there's also the GUF option for those with less GPPPU memory. And here is for using Flux Fill. I always load them in FFBA because it's faster since I have a 4090. As I explain here in this note, always load Flux Dev even if using the GUF option because the name Flux Dev will be used to save the metadata for Civitai. So if you configure the model, it will save it as Flux and enter directly with the right model on the model page. Otherwise, if not configured correctly, it might go wrong and the model might not appear on the Flux page. For example, we will use the normal dev model and, if necessary, make adjustments. Review the other options as well. In the section where you set the clip, you also need to configure yours. You can use either the GUF model or the normal clip. Load according to your needs. It's not necessary to change this node. It can be used to load the FEPI16 model. I usually use this node because I transfer it to my secondary GPU, especially because Alimama is very heavy even on a 4090. If I try to load it in FP16, it will definitely fill up the memory. Alimama is very heavier than Flux Fill because it functions as a base model, plus it can control net for inpainting. It works like a control net applied on top of the base model, making it more robust. Next, I direct the clip to my secondary GPU. If you don't have a secondary GPU, the CUDA 0 and 1 options won't even appear. 0 normally designate the main GPU. If there's no secondary GPU, the CPU can be used instead, although it will be slow. Or if you prefer, you can remove that node if it bothers you. Removing this node won't make any difference. Also, here you load the VAE, which everyone already knows, the standard one for Flux. You must configure the parameters correctly. Make sure that the control net is correctly assigned to the Alimama folder. On the website, when downloading, make sure that you name it correctly. If necessary, manually enter the name, not like mine, which is not named as Alimama Beta, but should be loaded here. Basically, that's the procedure for loading the models. So now that we know how to load the models, this is the Loras section. It's completely optional. You need to load your Loras here. You just simply click here. You can add how many Loras you want. See, and you just choose the Lora name. Click, and then you choose the weight. You can do multiple stacks of Lora. You can copy it. You can just hold Control. And actually, you can hold Alt. And then you create a new Lora stacker. You can just connect them if you want. So you can have multiple stackers connected. or you can just connect this one here. This is not needed. You should not delete this one because this one is connected to the end of the workflow where it will evaluate how many Loras you put on here. On the Lora count here, if it's 1 or 2, it's bigger than 0. It will record on the metadata the Lora that you use for inpainting. So this is important to keep it 0 or it more than 0, but don't delete this Lora stacker. Basically, that's it for Lora. So I'll show you briefly. Control room. Here, the main control room is where you're going to choose your settings. I'll explain each one of them later, and you choose to use cache. It was explained later as well. You put your prompt, your negative prompt, and the rest of your settings will go. Explore them later. Okay, this is just so you know where the control room is. So let's go to where you load your image here on the left panel. To see, there's 3 load images node. You need to understand each one of them. So the first one is where you load an external mask, this kind of mask where you can do in Photoshop, or you can save from ComfyUI. When you save a mask as in the black and white image, sometimes you want to just load in here and use that as a mask instead of doing manual mask. So you just drop your mask here. If you're going to use an external mask, you need to change this to yes, to true actually. Choose true. You're not going to use, like normally you don't use an external mask, you leave it at false. So this is the main load image node. This is where you actually need to drop your image, where you want to unpaint, so you drop your image here. And you click on the right, you right-click on it. You go on the opening mask editor. Let's inpaint her hair, for example. So you draw over her hair. Right, and then you click on save. This is going to save your mask. This is going to be used as inpainting. The normal, if you don't choose any other settings, this is going to generate the whole image and paint on this area. So what is this other node here? This node is for context. When this is used, this is so I need to explain to you guys. Localized areas, you see here on the main control panel, if you choose to use localized area in painting, if you enable this, it's going to generate only on the paint in the area. It's not going to use the whole full image. So if you leave this node, it's going to generate the full image. If you click on yes, it's going to use this group node here. This one usually lies in your area in painting. What does this do? I already explained. It's going to paint generate only on that area on a fixed size. It needs to be a forced size here, as it is set here, because this workflow is basically meant to do batches, and to do batches of in painting images, it needs to be on a forced size. It's going to generate a 1024 by 1024. You can change this value here if you want to generate at a higher resolution, but I recommend to just leave it at 1024. So if you're going to use localized area in painting, you don't need to actually use the context if you choose that node. If you choose yes on that node, it's going to draw a square over the painted area, like here, and it's going to generate on this square. It's not going to use the whole image. It's not going to use the sky, for example. It's not going to generate that. That again, it's going to generate only on this area. This is good to actually generate a faster speed. And to generate with more details, for example, let's say I want to generate only on her teeth, so I could in paint only her teeth and just prompt for a close-up teeth. And I don't say she's in Paris or anything like that. On the Eiffel Tower, I just paint her mouth and just put that on the prompt. And it's going to generate a really detailed mouth, for example. It's going to be just like Add Detailer. It's what Add Detailer does. So when to use the context node is to expand the image. So let's say I want to paint her hair, that I want to generate the K-Simpler to know a little bit more of the image. I want to understand that this image is being captured from below, so I can just go here and I can do like a rough sketch of the area I want to use a concept. I can just do this. I can just do a square of the image. Remember that it will always generate a square, so it's always good to try to take a context. In a square area like this, you can do whatever you want. This is not going to be used as in painting. This is just used as context. So if I save this, this whole area is going to be used as context, not just her hair, not just this square. Let's try again, actually. Let's do, instead of her hair, let's do her mouth that I explained before. So if I just want to paint her teeth, I'd say I just want to paint her teeth or her eyes, but let's go with her teeth. I already did it. If you just use the context node, gonna generate a really 24x124 only on her mouth. And this can make the image a little bit weird because it can have a lot of details and not know the rest of the image. It will not mimic the style of the rest of the image. So it can generate a weird thing, and it can generate a mouth that has nothing to do with this person, for example. So I need to expand the context. That's when you use that node, you expand the context. So if I leave this mask, it's going to paint only on her mouth, but it's going to use all of this as context. Could just expand the context a little bit, like only do her hair and her whole face. There's also a trick to not need this node here. So if I can just leave this empty, if I leave this empty, it's not going to use anything here as context. If you don't use a mask, if you don't mask anything here, it's not going to use context. You can force a context on your own mask. For example, I used to do this a lot on Automatic 11.11. You can just do a little dot. I'm going to do a bigger dot, but you can do a really small minuscule dot over the area you want to use as context. For example, I want to use her whole face as context. I can just do a dot here and a dot here. So it's going to impact this dot, but they're just small. It's not going to matter, and it's going to force the generator to use all of this. I used to do that a lot on Automatic 11.11. So if you use this dot technique, you don't actually need to use the context node. But if you want to be a little more precise and only paint her mouth, you can use the dots on the load image on this context node. Or you can just do it like this. You can just do a rough sketch on the area you want to use as context like this. So if I generate this, it's going to paint her teeth using this as context. So this is kind of important to understand because this is what I think can generate a lot of confusion. It needs to be an image of the same size of your loaded image. You need to understand that if you load an image here that's not the same size, it's going to mismatch. It's going to do a weird area. So you should make sure to not do that. So let's explain now Resize. This Resize group, small group here, right next to the load image, is where you resize your image. Because sometimes you just load a really big here. If I run this really quickly, if I queue this really quickly, like let's queue this, just so I can know the width and height of the image, you see this is a big image. If I paint this, it's going to take a lot of time because this is a 2048 by 37.2 image. So I might use, if I use the area in painting, this doesn't matter at all because it's going to paint 1024 by 1024. And then composite it back on this big image. So it's not going to matter. You don't need to resize your image if you're going to use the area in painting. This is why this is really good. You should almost always use localize area in painting. But let's say you're not going to use it. You want to generate on the full image, but this image is too big. You might want a smaller image. So you just click here and you resize to a smaller image. I normally don't. I usually do this like a 1200 because if I do 1024 by 1024, this is going to take the low end of the image, the width, for example, and it's going to be less than 1024. And that's not ideal. It's going to be a low resolution. So I put just this at a 1200 and 1200. So it generates a little bigger image, a little closer to what Flux normally does. This is going to make sure the image is a multiple by 8. When you resize, I will explain about this part later, this technicality later. But this is it. If you want to resize your image to generate the whole image, you just click here and you're going to end up with smaller image. And if you resize here, you can see here what the result image will be. Let's just generate the full focused image. Now it's going to generate a total of 1200. And if you resize here, you can see here what the result image will be. Really optional. You don't need to use it, especially if you're going to use area in painting. So now let's go back to the main control room. Let's explain a little bit further some of the options. So catch speed up. What is this? Catch speed up. It's going to use the apply first block custom node to speed up things. It's good for almost all generation, but it will, of course, have an impact on the quality of your image. But it's going to be really fast. I like this settings here. You can change it if you want. You can, of course, click here if you have this option to bypass it, or you can just bypass it in the control room. It's just for speed up. It's going to have a hit on the quality, but sometimes it's not that big of a hit. It's a good option to use. So about negative, when you want to use negative, you use thresholding. It will use thresholding if you click here. Use negative on the main control panel. And this is going to do everything automatically. It's going to calculate the CF for negative. You don't need to change anything. You just click there and that's it. This is the CF for negative. It's at 4. You can change this value if you want. It's going to use only when you have that option on. If you don't have that option on, this CF for negative is not going to be used. You don't need to worry about it. This is the normal guidance for Flux, and this is the standard CFQ1. You should not change the CF to anything other than 1. So you should leave this node alone. If you want to change the CF for negative, you can change here. And if you want to change your guidance, sometimes the lower guidance is better for realism. You can change it here. Okay? So this is the shader. This is the sampler. This is the amount of steps, and this is the seed. And this is important. This is the level. This is the denoise level. I actually use most of the times at 0 at 95. Sometimes you want to generate the whole area, the whole image, so use a full noise. And sometimes you want to do a really low denoise, just to change the image a little bit. So my workflow can work with lower noise if you want. I recommend a 0.95 most of the times. And this is the inpainting batch slider. This is where you choose how many inpaintings, how many variations of the image you want to get. So sometimes you want to get 4 inpaintings, 4 variations. So you choose 4 here. You want to get 2. You just choose 2. It's really a good option for inpainting because you can choose the one that's the best. And finally, there is the outpainting settings here. The outpainting is done in percentage for the top, right, left, or down. You choose how much you want to outpainting to expand your image. You can do outpainting and painting at the same time. I don't recommend to do that, but it works. It's better to outpaint first or inpainting first and then outpaint, but you can do both at the same time if you want. Flux fill is really good at outpainting. And Alimama is not that great at outpainting. So I recommend you not to use outpainting with Alimama, but with Flux fill, this is really good. It works with inpainting as well. And there is this, I forgot to tell you guys about, the additional guidance that is just added to Flux fill. If you are going to use normal Flux with Alimama, this value is not going to be used. If you choose Flux fill on the load model node, on the choose here, if you use Flux fill, which is 3, if you choose Flux fill, this guidance here is going to be added to the normal guidance you normally use. It's going to be automatic. It's going to add this to the normal 3.5. And this is going to add up to 30 guidance, which is the guidance Flux fill likes. It's the recommended guidance on the official workflow from Comfy. But it works also with even bigger guidance, with 50 guidance or something like that. So if you want to do a bigger guidance for Flux fill, you can change this value here. You can add more guidance for Flux fill. So this is just for Flux fill. It's not going to be used on Alimama, on normal inpainting. So I guess this is all the options. Remember, if you're going to use outpainting, you need to click here, enable outpainting or disable outpainting, since we're showing all of the details of this workflow. The outpainting is done on this group. It's going to calculate everything. It's going to make sure it's divisible by 8, which I'm going to explain later. In the end, it's not going to make your outpainting on a gray area. It's going to fill the outpainting area with something that resembles your image. So let's do it as an example. Let's outpainting this. I don't even know what block is there, but let's outpainting a little bit on the left and on the right. For down and up, let's go. Just so you guys can see how this will be done. You see? This is going to outpainting this area. It's going to fill. This is what I wanted to show. It's going to fill this area really fast. Going to fill this. So you can outpainting. You normally want outpainting with 1 denoise. So this fill part kind of doesn't matter, but sometimes you might want to outpainting with a lower denoise. So you can use fill. So I guess this is a good option. I already had this fill implemented, so it wouldn't hurt to actually add this. So now let's go to this left group here, which is the preserve metadata group. When you want to, what does that mean? Well, let's say we wanted to paint her teeth, and you're going to need to prompt for really close-up teeth. If you're not going to use the whole image. If you're going to use the whole image, you need to describe the whole image. You can, of course, emphasize a little bit on her mouth, but if you're going to use the whole image, you need to describe the whole image. But if you're going to use a localizer in painting, you will just write something like really close up teeth, really close up mouth, or whatever, and you will end up that as your positive prompt saved on your image. And you might not want that, because sometimes you generated previously image and just gonna be fixing a mistake or something. So you want to maintain all the original images parameters. So you want to keep prompt the negative prompt, the seed, the sampler, the everything that you used on that image and that original image. So that's when this comes in hand. This toggle you should enable here if you are going to use this to fetch your original image metadata. So you need to actually load your image another time here. So this is the automatic node that will retrieve all of this for you, or you can do it manually. You can just write the original prompt here, the original positive, negative seed. I didn't implemented the original scheduler and sampler. If you guys want that, you can tell me in the comments, but I don't think this is needed, but of course, to be more complete, it would be needed. So if you want to retrieve it automatically, let's use this image as an example. You just drop it here, right? It's going to load your image, but the prompt, it's not going to show up immediately. You will need to queue. If you queue and just stop, it's going to show you the prompt. This is the original prompt. It's going to use all of that. It's going to read the metadata in and retrieves the hashes. Actually, the hash is used that is printed on the prompt like this. For example, this has a few Loras, like 3 Loras, anti-blur. This is going to be added to the prompt, and this is going to be added a hash for it. This is going to be added to the metadata, so it's going to cross-post on Civitai about this Loras. It will also retrieve any manual Loras that you did before. I'm going to explain later what manual hash Loras is. So basically, you just load your image, and then you just drop it here, leave this on. Going to retrieve your original prompt, and it will not going to save the inpainting prompt. If you want to do manual here, you need to turn off. If you leave this on, it's going to prefer the automatic. If I don't drop an image here, I don't think it's going to error out, but it's going to be an empty prompt. So if you actually want to keep your painting prompt on your final image metadata, you just disable this whole group here. If you want to keep the original, you just drop here. If you're going to use manual, you just turn off this. Okay. So this lower group here, you don't need to worry about it. This is where everything is going to be calculated. It's going to use either the automatic prompt, the manual prompt. It's going to prefer the automatic, then it's going to prefer the manual. And if both are turned off, it's going to retrieve the inpainting positive prompt. For example, this is going to be done to all the other parameters, and this is where it retrieves hashes. Additional hashes printed on the image. What is additional hashes? Additional hashes is something that we implemented very recently on the image saver custom. Note that you can actually input any hashes from Civitai, and it's going to be printed on your image so this is going to retrieve those, okay, to add to your image metadata. So it just stays the same. And if you want to do a manual hash, for example, let's say you want to do a wildcard, you're going to use a wildcard pack. Uh, Wildcard pack is not something that is normally cross-posted on Civitai, but if get there in the page, the auto v3 from Civitai, and just in imputing a put it here, it's going to be added to your image. So if you upload an image to Civitai, going to cross-post to that back on that wildcard page, for example. This is really nice because it's going to make more cross-posting you can use. For example, let's say you added a control net in an open pose control net, for example, and you can just put the control net hash here. You can do the hash, comma hash to comma. Of course, you need to put the real hash. You can actually use the name. Let's say you just did a control net open pause, 2 dots, and the hash, so it's going to print the name on the image. This is really technical, and it's just the detail. You don't need to use this. You can just leave it. About all this group here, just go to Inpaint. This is just so if you want to preserve your image prompt, you just load your image here, drop your image here on the automatic, and leave this all on if you don't care. About this, just turn this off. Okay, this is not done in the main control room. This is done on this groups. Okay, so the main control room does not control it. So you guys are probably already tired of me, but let's keep going. This is a full explanation of the workflow. That's why I'm going into a lot of details, but you can use this really fast. So now let's explain this other option here, which is like fill from Automatica Lenevan. This is not the Dev Flux fill model. This is an option to use like in Automatic Level 11. What it does is really simple. It will just fill the in-painted area. So this is normally used when you want to erase something. Let's say you want to erase the Eiffel Tower as a whole. You don't need a full denoise of 1. I use a lower denoise because if you're going to use a full denoise of 1, this won't matter if you fill the image completely. But if you just want to use a lower denoise erasing the object while keeping a bit of context during denoising, when you go to the base sample event, you need to use this. So if I'm going to erase the entire thing, I'm not doing this right now. Let's say I want to erase her, for example, let's go to the open mask editor and then actually let's use the manual external mask. Okay, let's turn this to true and let's go. You're going to use the fill. This also determines how much you grow the mask, which I'll explain later. Let's just see what it does just to get a feel for what I'm talking about. So you see, this is useful to erase things like objects when you want to do a low denoised in paint. So basically it fills really fast the mask with the colors around it. This will probably end up generating a ghost with low denoise because it still has some information there. But it's useful sometimes. So that's it. And now let's explain another option, which is the Daemon detailer. I think I wrote this in the wrong order, but the detail Daemon, what this does is it is an alternative way of generating with more detail. It will produce extra details. You can use either the normal case sampler or you can use the case sampler for generation with diamond detail. This does not add anything to the speed. It's going to be the same speed, but Daemon detailer normally adds some noise to the generation process. And for normal generation, it's actually a great option for text to image generation, though for inpainting, it's not that great. I normally don't use it. I prefer the normal one. So you can generate with both. You can leave both on. So you can actually compare the images. If you leave both options on, the workflow will generate twice so you can compare them. This is where the Daemon detailer, the detailer Daemon does its thing. And this is the simple normal image that's shown here. You can compare both if you leave both options on. You can compare the difference as the Daemon detailer offers two options that you need to understand and change if you want. Of course, you can change these other options on the Daemon detailer. Like, don't recommend changing them. Although for inpainting, you might find better settings. This works really well for text to image generation, but not so much for inpainting. You can choose here for normal text to image, and I actually like around 0.60 to 0.75. But for inpainting, it's better to leave this at a lower denoise and lower detail level, because if you add too much detail, it's going to be weird for inpainting. This setting is for negatives. I really don't like the Taylor Diamond when using negatives. Thresholding, so this is the other option I recommend. Use around 0.12 or 0.15. Don't add more than this for the off detail. When you're using negatives, adding too much to the Diamond detailer is going to be problematic. This is only going to be used when you use thresholding. It isn't the normal setting when you're not using negative, so you need to change both these options to the desired. Okay, if you choose both, you can compare them here, but the workflow will not say both. It will prioritize the normal one. If you want the detailer one, you need to turn off the normal one. You can turn it off in the main control. However, if you leave both options on, it will prefer the normal on EO. You cannot choose none because you need to generate something. So you can either choose both or just one. These are the Diamond detailer. Now, let's go to the mask and faint or aura and grow with mask settings section, which is actually right above the control room. This is where the masking is done. This is my group for the very faint mask or aura mask. This is not needed. It's something that I used for testing. Sometimes this works well. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's just better to use grow and blur, and you don't need this faint area. It's not really the same as grow because you have a rough transition with an aura. The idea is that you can create a really big one. Or if you want, I need to resize the image because this image resolution is so large that the aura ends up looking small. So let's resize the image so you can see your. So this is the aura. You see, the idea is to paint in full denoise on the main subject. And then the K sampler would still use a little bit of context from around the subject. You either use this or you don't, but you need to grow your mask either with the faint mask or the crop or grow with blur. This is where you control how visible the aura is. The more visible you make it, the more pronounced the aura becomes. You lower the visibility, the aura becomes more subtle. However, you should not set this to 0 or else the composition may turn out poorly. As I mentioned before, you need to grow your mask slightly because if you don't use blur or the aura, the final composite won't blend as well. Proper masking ensures a seamless transition in the inpainting process. This is where you control the expansion of the aura. If you set it too large, it might not be useful, but if you keep it at a reasonable size, it helps refine the effect. Now, let's see the effect when we apply a large aura mask. If you use a gigantic aura mask, it will generate an extremely large blended area. However, I don't recommend this unless necessary. Additionally, you can apply blur to the aura I suggest using at least a small amount of blur, as it helps smooth the transition when compositing the final image. If you leave the blur at 0, the mask edges may appear too harsh, resulting in an unnatural blend. For best results, keep some blur applied. Otherwise, sharp transitions may make the inpainting look disconnected from the original image. This is the faded aura mask. You can choose to disable it from the control panel, but I suggest keeping it enabled for better results. If you disable it, the workflow will use the grow mask with blur instead. You must apply some level of blur and make sure it's set correctly. If you don't need expansion, just use some blur without growing the mask further. Using blur allows for a better final composite, making sure everything blends smoothly. If you're not using the aura, you can apply blur through this second option instead. Generally recommend not using both at the same time. It can grow with blur option is useful in some cases because it applies blur to both the mask and the aura. This second blur setting is meant for cases where you are not using the aura at all. If you are using the aura, leave this second blur setting at 0. Again, I recommend keeping the workflow simple set your blur settings in one place. Remember, no matter what method you choose, you must always grow your mask with blur to ensure a seamless result. Now, let's move on to a brief explanation of the image saver. Worry about how metadata is handled. It is processed automatically. The image saver will automatically store the model name, prompt, and all relevant metadata. You don't have to configure anything manually. The only settings you may want to change are the save path, file name, and file format. You can also choose whether to embed the workflow metadata into the saved pang file. Additionally, we have implemented an option to save the workflow metadata inside web images as well. So if you prefer WebP, you can now save your workflow in that format. That concludes the explanation for the image saver. So now I'm going to go with a more detailed explanation of some technicalities that's often done wrong on all the inpainting workflows that we've seen around there. That is the composite and the divisible by 8. This is rarely done properly, and I try to make sure I do it properly. So let's explain what is the composite. So if you don't composite your image, so let's say I'm going to inpaint her face, her teeth, or whatever, and let's just not talk about the localizer. Let's just say I'm going to inpaint her face, and I only want to change her face or her hair. If I don't composite the image in the end of the workflow, when this original image is passed through the VE encoding and decoding, it will lose quality. All the image here, all the pixels will have a little tiny differences between the original image and this image. This is really bad, especially if you're going to do sequential inpaintings. So if you're going to inpaint her hair, great. Then you inpaint her nose, inpaint her mouth, and paint her clothes. And after all that, after 4 or 5 inpaintings, your Eiffel Tower is going to be destroyed. It's going to have weird, muddy colors. The detail's going to be gone. So you can't actually do a workflow in painting without compositing your image. In the end, you need to composite, or else you're going to end up with a bad image. You need to do this. The original workflow from ComfyUI does not do the composite. Tried to explain to everyone on Reddit. I tried to explain to some people in Civitai that you need to actually composite it. If you don't do this, it defeats the whole purpose of inpainting. I just want to inpaint her face, not destroy the rest of the area that I'm not inpainting. Makes no sense. So you need to composite what Composite does is it's going to inpaint her face. Then it's going to take that inpainted image, paste it back on the original image. So when you paste it back here, it's going to preserve the whole pixels from the whole image. It's just going to change the mask, right? So this is what Composite does. So how does it composite? It just does its thing. In the end, you need to take the mask, the inpainted image, and the original image, and just glue all of them together. Why do I have this option here to not composite in the end? As I warn here, you should always composite. But if you're just going to do one in painting and you don't care, sure. You're not going to mess around with this image anymore, or for whatever reason, I really don't recommend this, but you can just not composite. You can generate the whole image with that area in painted. What it does is that it blends a tiny little better. If you don't composite, especially on plain images, like for example, the sky or a one color background. So if you have a one color background, sometimes when you paint there, you're going to see that it's not seamless when you glue back the image back, even if you use Grow with Mask. That's why Grow with Mask and the Fainted or try to fix this part. Of course, not this bigger aura tries to fix this problem when you composite back. So you should always composite back, but sometimes you don't care. It's going to be a tiny bit better. It's going to blend better if you don't composite. I really shouldn't be talking about this I keep fighting people because you should composite. You should not composite. This is very important because you're going to destroy your whole image if you don't. But if you care more about blending, you're just going to do one painting. You can turn this off if you want. So now that I talked about what Composite is and why you need it, let's talk about the divisible by 8. What is the problem with divisible by 8? So the DV decoding and encoding will only deal with an image that is divisible by 2, and the K-sampler will need an image that is divisible by 8. So whenever you feed an image to the K-sampler, or change it to the latent, and then the latent goes to the K-sampler and it's not divisible by 8, it's going to be stretch the image it's going to stretch itself. I don't know exactly what K-sampler does, if it crops or if it stretches, but it does change. Changes pixels on your original image, and you don't want to do that, especially because it's going to mismatch the composite. Because if I composite her face and then paste it back, if the generated face is on the image divisible by 8, but when I paste it back here, the original image is not divisible by 8, it's going to have a small pixel mismatch. This will look wrong. And it's really annoying when you see that, especially when you're comparing the results when you see that mismatch. So I wanted to avoid that. So how do you avoid this mismatch? To avoid this mismatch, you either resize the whole image, because when you resize the whole image, it's going to be divisible by 8. But again, if you resize your image, you're already losing quality, because whenever you scratch or you upscale or downscale your image, the pixel is going to change and it's going to lose a little bit of quality. Okay. So if you're really a purist and you want to keep your image the exact same, you should not resize your image. But then Even if you use just the area in painting, it's going to mismatch. Actually, the localized area in painting has some options to blend this mismatch. But if you're not going to use this, let's say you're not going to use the localized area in painting and you're not going to resize your image, you would get a mismatch on a normal workflow. On a normal painting workflow. So how do I fix that? How do I fix that without damaging the original quality of the image, without resizing? I decided to do was to actually crop the excessive pixels. So I prepared an image here. Excessive pixels, a total red image. Yeah. So let's see if uh, this doesn't have a mask, so it's not going to be used. So let's QSO just see what the sizes you see. This is 800 by 806. This 806 is not divisible by 8. These 6 pixels are gonna be cause a mismatch. So what it did is I decided to crop the pixels. Actually, it's from here, from the bottom here, it has more pixels than it should. So what I do is I'm gonna crop these pixels out. I'm gonna do my inpainting, and then I'm gonna paste the image back on this final image. With 806, so this makes sure a mismatch does not happen, but it also introduces another problem. Because if I just let's just do an example here. Let's open a mask. Let's paint this whole image, right? The whole image. It's just like you may change, as an example, the whole background. So it's a full mask. Okay, oh, I'm going to use all of this. Let's prompt for something. But let's just leave this as it is. I'm not going to use negative, so it can be faster. I'm going to use cache speed. I'm not going to use refine mask. I'm not going to use diamond detailer. Just the normal one, and not gonna use localized in painting. This is important. So just a normal generation. Let's generate that one so we can change the whole image. Let's just do a batch of one. Okay, let's do it again. If I'm not mistaken, this is using Alimama, right? It's the Flux fill. Yeah, it's normal dev. Let's wait a little so it's finished. Let's see what it did. It did a cowboy with let's prompt for a different background. Okay, even with one. Didn't realize it is still using the red background. No, no, it's because, I prompted for a red brick. Let's just prompt for yellow. Let's do a yellow brick wall, so let's see. And again, this is where you see your results, okay? This is where you compare it, the original image with the result. See, it impainted everything, basically everything on this image, right? I actually see some weird thing here in the back, and the bottom, maybe I didn't do a full mask, but anyway, you see this is the result image there. It's not really a red wall on it, but what about those 6 extra pixels on the image? So if this is what happened, this was on the right, not the bottom. So you see the 6 pixels are back from the original image, because if I paste back the image to avoid a mismatch, I need to go back to the original image, and the original image have 6 extra pixels. So you're going to end up with an image with this red border. But if you don't want the red border and you just don't do this second composite, because this is a second composite, because if I'm just painting the whole thing right. Let's say I had an image of, I'm going to use another example so you guys can see. Let's just put Mark here. This image of Mark is the same size. It has 6 extra pixels on the right border. Let's actually inpaint his hat. Let's just go. Let's inpaint his hat. So I want Mark using. Let's say against the brick wall wearing a green cowboy hat. Let's just do that. So you see the mask has blur. It's not using, it's generating the whole image. So that's it. He has a green hat, okay? So you're going to see that all the pixels are the same. You see the bad pixels. All the pixels of the original image are the same. They didn't change at all because I did a first composite. If I didn't do the first composite, I'm going to show you guys. It's going to be bad. It's going to change the whole image. You can see that it's seamless, right? Changed his hat to a different hat. It doesn't have a mismatch. Let's just explain the composite. Let's not composite. Let's not composite. So if you look really closely, you see how his fingernail is changing. Good. Why is this pixel changing? Didn't paint this pixel. Why is it changing? It's really clear on the beard, for example. Why is his beard changing? Shouldn't be changing. I'm not inpainting his beard. What about this pattern here? You see, this is the problem with painting without composite. It changes the rest of your image, changes the whole image. Little by little, it's going to destroy your image. If you do 3, 4, 5 in paintings, a lot of the details are going to be gone. But just one in painting, you can clearly see how much it changes the whole image, right? So you need to composite. This is more blended than the composited image. I don't care. I don't want to destroy my image, so I need to composite. Okay? So now there's no change in the original pixels. You see? But then I'll just paste the image back with the extra pixels. Okay? So you see, the image where I was working, where the K-sampler worked, did not have the extra pixels. But just to be a purist, I just wanted to give you back your original image with the original size. So I do a second composite where I paste back your image. Your image back on the original size. But again, as I explained it with the red border, if you inpaint really close to the edge, you're going to get a weird border. Because that border is from the original image. So if you don't care, if you don't want these extra pixels from the original image, you can simply just not do the second composite in the end. You can just turn off this second composite, then you will end up with an image that does not have that 6 pixels. It's just an image that is divisible by 8. I made sure this image is divisible by 8. So if I want to keep in painting, let's say I want to change his glasses, I want to change his clothes. So I can just keep doing with this image that is divisible by 8. It's not going to crop anymore because this image is already divisible by 8. But the original image was not. So every time you load an image that is not divisible by my workflow that it delivers to you, the original sized image, the original resolution. But you might not want that. You might not care. So you just turn off the second composite here, okay? If you turn this off, the second composite, it's going to give you an image that is divisible by 8. I made sure it's not destroyed because it has the first composite, but it's a divisible by 8 image. So there's that. This was the final thing. If you're doing outpainting, my workflow already makes sure your image is divisible by 8 whenever you do an outpainting. There's some math calculations here to make sure it's divisible by 8. So whenever you outpainting, let's just do an outpainting here. As you can see, that's outpainting mark. Let's do more stuff like 30, 30, 34, whatever. Yeah. So let's do so it's going to expand the image a lot, you see. It's filled with the black border. That's the problem. The black border is going to be used. The fill, because the original image has a black border, what I can do is that I can actually paint this borders. So you see, I knew this would happen because, first of all, this is not dev fill. It's not good without painting. This is Alimama. Alimama is not great without painting. But of course you can do it. But because of the black borders, the image got a little bit weird. I was trying to paint this black borders. Okay. So let's go to the mask editor. In Paint, in Paint, let's do a really rough paint of the borders. So we eliminate any black borders. So it's going to inpaint his hat and the border. So I didn't do a proper masking. See. Okay, so let's generate again. Let's hope this is going to work. You're going to see that the fill is going to be better or not bad. Let's see if it's going to be better. See, it's taking longer because it's an outpainting. The bigger image. Yeah, that's better. You see, there's no black borders anymore. And the second composite just turned off automatically because the image is already divisible by 8. There's no need to paste back because if you're gonna outpaint, it's always gonna increase your image. So works. Alimama is not that bad for outpainting. But Flux fill, dev Flux fill is better. And just so we could keep experimenting a little bit more, let's just do what I said, that Alimama is actually really good. That is actually about changing the whole character, the whole background. So let's say let's just expand my workflow a little bit here. This is not going to be on the official workflow, but let's say you want to just let's clear this. Let's clear the mask. Let's take this image. Let's remove the background. Remove the background. Let's use InspireNet. It's a good one. Let's remove the background. Let's see what it does. Preview. So you remove the background. It's really good, right? But I want to paint the whole background. If I get this mask here, let's see, mask to image. there's actually a good node that just preview masks. Preview mask preview from Essentials. So let's preview the mask. So the mask is actually marked. So this is going to change mark. I don't want to change mark. I want to change the background. So let's invert this mask. And then let's preview the mask again. Let's remove this. Okay, let's use the inverted mask as the actual mask. Let's put this into a space here. Let's use this inverted mask, put this in, and then let's change the mask as the mask. And this is going to change the background. Leave mark alone. Okay. So let's just change to a red brick wall. Red brick wall wearing a hat. Just a green cowboy hat. So when you change the whole background, I think Alimama is really great at that. Of course, you need to mess around with the blur. Because especially when you do the aura, I'll do the aura later, maybe. Because the aura actually, when you're painting the background, grows inside the character. So it's not really great. So it's better to use a blur. Really low denoise blur, the low expanded blur. So let's see what this is going to turn out to be. You see this is bad. This is really bad. This is bad because of the outpainting that I forgot to exclude. But let's not do outpainting. I can use the fill just so you guys can see. You see the fill is actually good to look at this kind of thing. Why does it have colors? Right? So the mask is not really perfect. The mask actually has some context of the original background. So it's not really great for this kind of job. So you see, you're not getting a really good image because I need to make sure the whole background is gone. So let's try. Let's see. I probably want to grow this mask. They're already expanding. I probably don't want the blur radius all that much. Need some blur. Let's just put it 1. Let's expand inside the character a little bit, but not with too much blur. Let's see what's going to happen. This expanded inside the character, but without too much blur. This should be better. You see, it erases the background a lot. Let's see what happened. This is not great, right? This is not great. The problem is I want to change the background, but I want to keep my character. So what could I do? You can add a second control net for that. Let's try to add another control net. So I have this group here. Let's hijack my control net. Let's add the Union. The Union Pro control net. I could do a line art. Let's not do tile. Let's bypass this. I want to do a line art. I don't want to do the preprocessor. I want to do the background. I don't want to do the pre-processing. If I get the image here, let's see what I get. This realistic line art. So there's a bunch of stuff in the background. I don't want that. How can I just get the character's line art and just use the already cropped character here? So I can just use this image. So let's just get the dropped background image. Just use reroute here, just so it's better. Let's connect this image here. So you see. No, I don't have the rest of the background. But now I want to use this as a line art control net. Let's just hijack my control net. Let's hijack from here. For painting, let's take the positive, connect to the positive. In conditioning, let's take the negative conditioning, put on the negative. Let's feed it back. Let's remove this. Because this is a sequential control, I'm just going to add another one. I need to put the realistic. Actually, let's go back, because maybe I want. No. So let's put the image here. Feed the control net with this image. And let's go back to the normal conditioning, right? So I just hijack my conditioning here just to add second control net with a strength of 0.4. Starting from the beginning, ending it. Let's see if just there. Choose the correct hat. Yeah, for the unit. Let's go now. This is going to use a lot of VRAM because has Alimama another control net. Maybe if you use Guff, you can use both. Let's see if this improves what I want. Well, it's way better now. Of course, there is a problem with his hand, but it's already better, right? I can see a little bit of my original image. So you see the advantage of using Flux Dev with Alimama. So we can actually use other control nets. I think you can do that with Dev, but I don't think it will be good. Actually disable cache because for this, it's going to take a while, but especially without the catching, but it's going to be a really better image. Let's just wait. So to explain this compare here is when you use automatic K11 and fill, when you use the fill, it's going to compare with the fill, and this is going to compare with the original. So it's done. His hands is bad, but you see the background is really good to the brick wall. Really well done. So you see that this works okay. Let's try to switch to it's a Flux fill. It's going to crash because always crashes when I switch from one model to the other. If you guys know how to not make this crash happens, please let me know. Let's change. Let's see it crashing just so you guys can see that it always crashes. Maybe if I increase my virtual memory, maybe if I increase it in the volume where Comfy is, who knows? It's going to crash and then we are going to reboot. You see it crashes. So it just rebooted. We're probably back now. Okay, so I'm going to use Flux Fill now and let's just do the same thing with the control net. Let's see how Flux does with a control net. Actually, no, let's just stop this. Let's do without the control net, right? Oh, I forgot to say what control net I was using. This is probably bad as well. You need to tell the Using Pro Control Net, what option you're going to use? I was going to use line art. So let's just bypass this, so it's not going to use. So we can see if it makes a difference. So Flux fill is not really great with this type of inpainting. See, it's loading the models. So again, I was explaining that this is just so you can see how a very fast fill works, right? This is what a very fast fill works. And this is the full image. So it's almost finished. Let's see. This is now Flux fill. You see Flux fill, even with negative, it's not really great. The Inpaintings is really good. I mean, it didn't do the weird thing that Alimama did. It's almost like it has an internal line art control net in itself. But the background's colors are really not vivid or anything like that. I really don't like changing the whole background with dev fill. So let's see. Let's with fill. Let's try adding a control net to the dev fill. I haven't tried testing this very much. I imagine it's not going to change much. This is without the cache speed up. So it's going to take taking a little bit more. But it's better. So we can compare with the other, with the Alimama result. So you see the line art control that barely changed anything. Right? I don't think it changed it too much. I really don't. I think it's pretty much the same thing. So what could we do to improve this with fill? So we could, there's not much we can do with this actually. This is just how Flux fill works. But we can try to increase the additional guidance. Let's change this to 50. This is probably going to be a little bit better. I'm going to use the cache again. Does this takes too long? Let's see, it's going to increase the quality. Oh my gosh, it's really worse. Probably because of the cache. Let's turn off the cache. I don't know, maybe it's the additional guidance. Because as that's a little bit too much. So you're going to see, I don't really love Flux fill and painting for backgrounds. It's the colors are really not that great. You see, it's not really better. It's not really better. So it's better just to do whatever that number was, 26.5, right? 26.5, we could try. We could try to increase the negative, say, FG, maybe using the thresholding. We can actually, let's not use the negative to see what we get. Maybe Flux doesn't like negatives thresholding. No, it's not that. You see that it's worse. So Flux fill is really not great with this kind of changing background's not great, but it's really good to change just small details. For example, let's stop using this background. Let's just go back the normal mask. So I want to just change his hat. I think I overdid this here. Okay, change to a red hat. This should be good. Maybe I should grow the mask with blur. The fill doesn't need too much grow blur to composite on the mask. You see, it's really good. It's probably better than Alimama for small objects changes like this. A Flux feels really great, really great. You see, it's really good, really good. So yeah, that's it. If you want to change a small part of the image, you use Flux feel. If you want to use control net, you want to use Loras. If you want to change the character's face, you probably want to use Alimama. Let's just do a final in painting with outpainting. So I want to do an outpainting, and that's it. With Flux, I should describe the floor a little bit. Oh, and I should have just painted the borders because this image has this black border, so I'm going to not be great. So I'm going to generate again, right? So let's just wait for this, just so you guys can see. I normally prefer Flux fill for out painting, so let's see what will happen. The out painting with fill almost didn't bother with this border. It didn't mess with the image too much. It's way better than Mama. Look at how beautiful this image is. So if I am painting that board, it's going to be really great, right? So let's try to do this. And then I'm going to want to show you guys the batches. So let's do a batch of 2. You guys can see when you do a batch of 2, it changes for 2 images. Images at the same, of course, this will use more RAM and take longer, but it's nice when you want to choose between options. There's this note here as well that just show you black shadow of the mask with the content changed. It's just another preview. You can even delete this if you want. This is what I use to compare. This is generating 2 images. This is probably why it's taking too long. So we just did 2 images now, you see? And it's really good. It's really good. So you see, didn't even describe the floor, and it made the floor. And I just love Flux fill out painting. It just feels really good. This is the second image. You see, you can do in painting and out painting at the same time. It works. And that's it. That's it. So you have the option to in painting with batches. If you do just the hat, for example, you can have multiple hats. You can do let's do it. Let's do this final test. I know this video is too long already. Let's just do a final batch of hats. And since I just want a hat, I'm going to use the localized area out painting and not do out painting. Let's just say. Man on his back against a brick wall wearing funny hats. Let's see what we get. Let's do 4. And I'm not going to do 0.9. I want to change the whole thing. I want to see completely new heads. This is not using the control net, because that is not really great with controller. You see, this is using the Bill. I could just erase this, of course. But since I want to change the whole hat, I want a new hat, I'm leaving this on. When I was just changing the color, I should not have left this on. I should have left this off because it could use the structure of the hat just to change the color. So erasing the hat is not really that great of an idea. But since I want to change the whole thing, this one, variation of hats, let's see. This generated 4 different funny hats. So you can use the Inpaint batch for that. This is how batches can be good. So you can choose from a lot of variations. So I guess this is it. It's the final thing I wanted to show you guys. If you need help with the rock flow, you can always reach to me on Civitai, and that's it. Thank you for watching. This is super long. This is my first video, sorry. And that's it. Thank you for watching.